Okay, good morning. I think we'll get started and hope that one of our speakers is having tech problems, which is why we're a little late starting today. But with Monica McInnes's help, we're hoping at least to get the audio connection with him to work. So here we go. Welcome to Ethnic Media Services weekly national news briefing. I'm Sandy Close, EMS Director and the moderator for today's event. Our co-hosts today include One Voice, a leading nonprofit civic engagement organization in Mississippi, LDF, the Legal Defense Fund of the NAACP, and the Southern Coalition for Social Justice, based in North Carolina. Today, we focus on Mississippi, the birthplace of the civil rights movement, where community activists are taking the redistricting fight for fair representation to local school boards and city councils after the GOP-dominated legislature approved gerrymandered maps for state and congressional districts. These local efforts are scoring small but impressive gains and mirror a growing activism around redistricting at the local level in other southern states where gerrymandered maps have severely undercut voters of color in state and congressional elections. Mississippi's redistricting battle is anything but a lost cause, to quote one of today's speakers. We welcome Amir Badat, attorney with the Legal Defense Fund, who will update us on the status of redistricting in Mississippi and the shift of focus to the grassroots. Nisambi Lambright and Monica McInnes of One Voice, leaders in the community organizing efforts behind today's call. Pastor Jose Rodriguez, who worked with One Voice on the 2020 census and has focused on expanding healthcare access for Latinos around COVID-19 in a state whose legislators have refused to expand Medicaid. Gary Fredericks, chair of the NAACP Gulfport branch and a member of the board of directors of the Gulfport Memorial Hospital, about a successful battle with the city council for fairer maps. And Danielle Q. Lee, director of Boat People SOS, the only active organization representing Asian Americans in Mississippi, of whom Vietnamese are the largest group. We will send expanded bios along with a video of today's briefing, which we are also live tweeting, to everyone on the call. We ask speakers to speak slowly as I'm speaking so our interpreters can keep up with you in Spanish, Mandarin, and Korean. And reporters, please enter your questions for our remarkable group of speakers today from Mississippi in the chat, and we will address them as time allows. Now we begin, and I go first to Amir Badat, attorney with the Legal Defense Fund. Mr. Badat.
Thank you so much, Sandy, and thank you to Ethnic Media Services for organizing this really important briefing. I appreciate everyone who is joining the call today to learn more about Mississippi, to learn more about the redistricting battles that we're having here in the state, and to help shine a light on what's happening and all of the important work that we're doing here in the state. And I'm honored to be sharing the virtual stage with my fellow co-panelists who are all doing really, really incredible work that I'm excited to hear more about on this panel. So I'll start off by talking a little bit about why we should be talking about Mississippi? Why are we having this event at all? And I think that there are two really important reasons for why not only the redistricting fight that we're having in Mississippi is important, but all of the issues that we're working on are important. So number one, I think it's because Mississippi is home to the largest proportion of Black citizens in the country. It's the state with the highest by percentage Black population in the entire country. It's the state that has a long and storied history of civil rights heroes and victories. As Sandy mentioned at the outset, the civil rights movement was born in Mississippi. And I think in order for us to understand what's going on in this country right now, particularly in the context of voting rights, in order for us to really understand how to develop solutions to what's going on in this country, we have to look at places like Mississippi. We have to be focused and pay attention to what's happening in places like Mississippi for us to be able to have the fight across the country. Number two, Mississippi has historically been almost a predictor of what happens in other parts of the country. We can go all the way back to the late 1800s after the Civil War, when the white supremacists in Mississippi started the Mississippi Plan. Right, this was the plan of intimidation, violence, and a plan that used legal tactics to try to suppress the Black vote and Black civic participation during Reconstruction. And the Mississippi Plan, including the 1890 Mississippi Constitution, was used by states like South Carolina, Alabama, Louisiana, other states across the South to help suppress Black civic participation and Black progress across the country. And we're seeing the same things happening today. Look at the fight that we're having with abortion. That the case Dobbs that the Supreme Court to overrule Roe v. Wade came out of Mississippi. So when we think about these important fights that we're having across the board, not only in voting, but also in the context of health, education, economic justice, we need to be paying attention to Mississippi. So I wanted to use that as kind of a broader frame for us to have this conversation about redistricting. Redistricting in Mississippi got its start, obviously, with the census, and other folks on the panel are going to talk a little bit more about the census. In the middle of last year, in 2021, Mississippi's legislature, which is responsible for redrawing its maps, put together a committee of legislators dominated by Republican legislators who are responsible for proposing maps to the full legislature for the full legislature's adoption. That committee met 3 times in public for a total of 45 minutes. And in those 3 public meetings that occurred for 45 minutes, they convened the committee, appointed its members, adopted criteria, and adopted maps. So a lot of the work, almost all of the work that went into producing these maps happened behind closed doors without the involvement of Mississippi's Black legislators. And as you might predict, the maps that came out of this process were very unfair and not representative of the state as a whole. The congressional map included one district that was a Black majority district that had a packed population, a packed Black voting age population, which meant that the surrounding districts, the surrounding congressional districts, lacked the Black voting age population that would be required for those districts, for Black voters in those districts to actually have an opportunity to elect candidates of their choice. Same story with the state legislature. The state legislative maps also were not fair. They did not offer Black voters fair representation, even though Mississippi's Black population as a percentage of the states grew in this official census numbers. Mississippi did not gain Black majority districts in the state legislative maps. And even though that process is now over, even though both maps have been adopted by the legislature and signed into law by the governor, there are legal challenges that have already been fought in the courts and will likely continue to be fought in the courts against both of those maps. But the purpose of this call today is for us to talk about local and county level redistricting in Mississippi. So even though the fight is still continuing at the state and congressional level, a lot of the advocates and legal community in Mississippi have shifted our attention to to county and local level redistricting, which, as I'm sure most of the folks on the call know, that is incredibly important in terms of the types of laws, the types of policies that affect people's day-to-day lives. When you think about your school board, when you think about your city council, those are the entities that are making decisions that will impact your child's education, whether or not a pothole on your road is fixed, or whether or not the garbage is being picked up on time. And those are the policies and the issues that really have a huge impact on people's lives. And a lot of people don't know that those entities are also subject to redistricting. So we at LDF, along with our partners at One Voice, the NAACP, and various different organizations in Mississippi, have been very engaged at the local and county redistricting level. We've been working with Mr. Fredericks and the other folks on this call down in Gulfport and in Harrison County. And I think they'll talk a little bit more about the specifics about redistricting efforts that we've had there, but we've been able to score some important victories that have allowed Black voters and other minority voters in these jurisdictions to have more of a say and more of an impact in elections that are happening at the local and the county level. So I think I might have hit my time limit there.
Yes,
I'll stop and
but that's a terrific overview and a great segue now for our speakers from One Voice. And we'll start with Nsambi Lambright, the director, and then she will tag team with her colleague, Monica McInnes. Nsambi, how are you seeing the state of activism? And I might almost say, is the energy still there? And are you seeing a growing concern? This is very newsworthy for us.
Absolutely, Sandy. And thank you so much for having us today. And you mentioned our grounding in the civil rights movement, and Amir also mentioned it in his comments. And One Voice really started on that foundation and being born out of the work of the Mississippi State Conference, NAACP. A lot of our work is grounded in the organizing work that was done during the Mississippi Civil Rights Movement. So, being based in civic engagement and understanding that voting rights is at the core of any sort of social justice work in Mississippi. You have to kind of start there to make sure that people have power. And in Mississippi is, where we kind of started our work, along with leadership development and a number of other social justice issues. And so, yeah, I'm very happy to say that there's a growing infrastructure of civil rights and social justice organizations that are working on civic engagement and other social justice issues in Mississippi right now. And so, it looks pretty bad, with the Dobbs decision and other decisions that have impacted us over the years. We have a long way to go, but we're fighting and we are seeing a few victories. As many of you know, we did successfully change our state flag several years ago. So we do see some victories of Mississippi. We know that when we fight, we win. And we started based on that premise that when we get people active and when we make sure that they have the tools and skills to participate effectively, that they can effectively impact social policy.
You talked about the efforts around the school board in Harrison County School District. And that was such a dramatic example of this energy now focusing on the grassroots.
Absolutely. We knew that we started working with folks in Harrison County and folks all over the state during the census. And our civic engagement process, of course, goes from voter registration through voter engagement, through voter protection. And of course, when census time came around, that became part of our civic engagement work. And so these are folks that we have been working with throughout the process. And so our saying is that, you know, it never stops. So from voter registration to census to redistricting, we just always stay on the go and keep folks activated, whether it's a school board election or Congress. Every election is important. And even when there's not an election, citizens can still stay involved in the political process, whether it's through the census or redistricting. So yeah, Harrison County has been one of those places where citizens have, you know, continued to stay engaged in organizing work over the years. And we've been very pleased to be part of their work over the years through the census work and through redistricting work, and you know, continue to be part of that fight.
Could you tell us what was the issue you feel that pressure on the school board was able to get at least recognition that the community input mattered?
Yeah, from the beginning of the the redistricting process, we've been calling for transparency, and that's been at the congressional level, state level, and local levels. And so again, at the school board level, we were asking for transparency. Let the citizens be involved in the redrawing of school board lines. Let the citizens have a say in what happens with the redistricting with the school district. And the school district had said, you know, to community that there was not going to be an open process. And I know that Gary is on here to talk more about what they said directly to him, because I didn't attend any of those meetings. But yeah, it was really a fight about transparency and making sure that community folks understood, even though we may not be demographers, we may not know how to draw maps, we may not have law degrees, but we want to be at those tables because it's our children who are attending those schools. These are our taxpayer dollars at work, and we will be at the table and we will have a voice.
Thank you. And now you wanted to tag team with Monica McInnes. So let's welcome Monica to tell us about your work from Clinton and your work with One Voice.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much, Ms. Sandy, for having us along with the Ethnic Media Services. Glad to be here along with the other colleagues that we have been working with on the ground for a while now. As Shami already stated, that we have been doing this for quite a while, and this continued effort in great partnership with our partners. And just talk a little bit about the Clinton piece that we spoke on that earlier, that we believe that redistricting is most important on the local level. I know that a lot of people focus on the congressional and state level, but I think that the most important part of redistricting is on the local level. And I live in the city of Clinton, Mississippi. It's the 10th largest city in Mississippi and a few miles outside of Jackson, Mississippi.
Our interpreters are asking you to speak a little more slowly.
I get that all the time.
Okay. You speak like an organizer, fast. Okay, you have to.
Yes, ma'am.
More slowly. Okay.
Okay. Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
So yes, the Clinton is a few miles outside of Jackson, and it has a governing body of a mayor and 6 aldermen and 1 at large. So in 2010, the census showed that the city had a total population of 25,216 people, of whom 8,600 of those were African-American, with a voting age population overall of 19,000. And then it also showed that the census data indicated that the city population had increased from 22% in 2000 to 34% of African Americans in 2010. And so for most of the communities in 2010, it was the first time that a lot of them was getting involved in the process of redistricting, or have heard of the process. And so once the community was educated on and informed, and became aware of what it was and had a better understanding, they was ready to have their voice heard in decision-making within their community. And so during the 2010 redistricting cycle, the city of Clinton presented a map to DOJ that claimed that there was not enough growth or shift in the population, that the lines did not have to be adjusted. However, there was a great significant growth in the city of Clinton. And so the NAACP of Clinton and organized around the communities and came together and held workshops and things. And they produced an alternative map that was drawn using technical support from One Voice, and submitted that map to DOJ on behalf of the city of Clinton NAACP. During that time, we had the Section 5 of the DOJ. So they, once the map was submitted and DOJ received the map, they issued a letter of determination. And so in 2012, the redistricting plan was resubmitted and showed that there was a minority district. And just recently in the last election, we have our first African-American alderman on the board since 1985. These are some of the works that we still can continue today, working in some of the local communities, producing alternative maps. So far, we have produced, I think, about 7 alternative maps. We have had some small victories, but those small victories will become big victories over the next 10 years.
Well, that's terrific. I want to just ask Mr. Badat to tell us just a little about the Harrison County School District work that One Voice worked with you to do, because it's such a good example of what Ms. Lambright is saying about transparency and what Monica McInnes is speaking to about community engagement.
Yeah, so the Harrison County School Board had its redistricting process, started its redistricting process several months ago, and through the work of the community and the work of organizations like One Voice, we were able to be involved in that process and to submit. Essentially what we did was we were able to advocate for a more transparent process by submitting a letter to the school board. The school board had initially scheduled in a notice that was issued on Friday, scheduled a meeting that was supposed to take place on a Monday to adopt proposed redistricting maps. And obviously the span of just a couple of days over a weekend is not enough time for anyone, let alone members of the community who have no experience with reviewing or analyzing maps, no experience with, understanding demographic information, things like that. That left very, very little time for anyone to be able to digest those maps and understand what the impact of those maps was on community representation. So with our partners, we submitted a letter to the school board that essentially asked them to, well, first what it did was it reminded them of their obligations under the Federal Voting Rights Act, as well as under the 14th Amendment of the Constitution. And it also advocated for certain transparency measures that would enhance the ability of the public to participate in the process and to really understand what's going on. And what the school board did on its vote on Monday, rather than voting on the proposed maps, it actually chose to delay the process so that the public would have more of an opportunity to digest the maps and put forth an alternative map if it decided to. And that was a big win, because what is really, really critical in this process is that the public has an opportunity to tell its elected officials what the communities of interest are, what maps should look like and how they want to be represented. So that was a big win on the part of the community, and we couldn't have done it without the involvement of folks on this call.
So one of the things that that Ms. Lambright and Ms. McInnes said is that without the protection of the Department of Justice's oversight, which was stripped bare in a decision in 2011, now it's up to people more than ever to fight for their own representation. Ms. Lambright, can you just conclude on that? And then I'll go to Mr. Fredericks.
Yeah, absolutely. Pre the Shelby decision, some of these processes had to get pre-clearance. For instance, the changing of precincts, and also notifications about meetings, that sort of thing. There had to be a lot of community notification and input. Now, post Shelby, you don't have to get that sort of input, and you don't have to notify community. And so now it becomes apparent that community is upfront and staying on top of these things to really pay attention and monitor them and to hold them accountable, and to also make note when violations occur, because now we have to make note and file complaints on the back end instead of having those protections on the front end.
It's a very important point. Mr. Badat, because I, like many of us on this call as journalists, don't track the details of Shelby, can you just refine the legal, the change in the oversight of the Department of Justice that our speakers are referring to?
Sure. So Shelby County versus Holder was a Supreme Court decision decided in 2013. And it was, the issue in that case was whether Section 4 of the Voting Rights Act, which had a pre-clearance formula, which a formula to decide whether or not certain states that had a discriminatory history in the context of voting should be subject to pre-clearance by the Department of Justice. And pre-Shelby County, the way the process worked was that anytime a state that was covered by Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act enacted a new change in election laws, or enacted a new redistricting map, or like Nishabi mentioned, had a polling place change. It could be as small as that, a precinct change. All of those changes had to go to the Department of Justice. And the Department of Justice would do an evaluation based on data submitted by the state or the jurisdiction of whether or not that change had a discriminatory impact on minority voters inside of that jurisdiction. So if it did, then the Department of Justice would essentially say, law is not going to go into effect, try again. And if it didn't have a discriminatory impact, only then could the law go into effect. So like Nishabi mentioned, that was kind of an ex-ante check on these jurisdictions that had a history of discrimination. Post Shelby County, where the court decided that that process is actually unconstitutional, the court said, and the reasoning was that, well, we've made a lot of progress since 1965 when Section 5 was enacted. Look at all of the progress we've made on the race front. We don't need this process anymore. We don't need pre-clearance anymore. We can let these states do what they want. After that decision, what we saw was within days, states enacting discriminatory voter ID laws, states enacting all sorts of discriminatory election laws that had a negative impact on the ability of Black and minority voters to access the ballot. And it's also impacted redistricting. So this was the first redistricting process that we had under the post-Shelby County regime.
Thank you. No matter how often we hear that as reporters, it's still the details that often are hard to keep in mind. So these are very important indicators of why local activism is now the core effort that can push for fair representation. Mr. Fredericks, I have to ask you to limit your comments to 5 minutes because we have a little bit of a late start, but you're at the center of efforts now in Gulfport. Could you tell us a little about the success, which strikes me as very significant, that you've had dealing with the city council over fair representation?
Well, thank you for the question, the opportunity to speak before you. It's a collective effort, and it's one of consciousness, and it's one of preparedness. We began this process preparing people for the census, but educating and activating and the civic engagement had to be expanded to involve all the citizens of the Gulf Coast. And the reason we were so passionate, and we still remain passionate, is the fact that Harrison County, as you see in the 6 counties, has a 10% minority increase first. And secondly, the city of Gulfport is the 2nd largest city in the state of Mississippi. So that was important to talk with the city, make sure that the elected officials and that the citizens were made aware so they can express their engagement and be involved in the process as we proceed and champion for advancement on that city council.
So what was your concern about the way that they were going to draw maps, and how difficult was it to engage local community people to make your point clear about the need for fair representation?
Well, when you look at the traditional maps and you look at the population, they did match up. The dilution and the orchestration of the maps that were going to be voted on before full transparency took forth was challenging. So it wasn't easy, but it goes back to what both Monica Nasambe and Amir had expressed, is this whole transparency process and getting the civic engagement holistically from the elected officials and the residents to make sure that they were aware of the process so that their voices could be heard.
What is the NAACP in Gulfport planning now, and where do you see this activism next?
Well, with the representatives on this call today and of a larger perspective, we want to look at the drawing of the gerrymander line from the legislative maps, particularly in Harrison County, in our areas, to see if and we believe there's an opportunity through the legislative process, judicial process, to advocate, even though those maps have been voted on, to look at every opportunity for fair representation, minority representation in the state legislature. We feel that opportunity still exists and it's there. We have to do our due diligence in the legal process.
And you've been a leader for many years in Gulfport. You've run for office. You are the board of directors of Gulfport Memorial Hospital. How do you see the population shifting, and to what extent are you looking at this issue as really one of fair representation for all the new and changing communities, the increasing diversity of the Gulf?
I feel like there's an opportunity for us to be the footprint, to be the champion, to help lead Mississippi in the direction that it needs to go in the 21st century. It's time, the opportunity is here. And as I think Amir had mentioned earlier, civil rights advocacy, the footprint has come from Mississippi, and why not the Gulf Coast? To be a beacon of light for the entire state.
And the most important, beyond looking at the congressional and legislative maps drawn in the redistricting process, where do you see at the grassroots other indications of this activism for greater representation?
That is a wonderful question. I'm glad you asked that. Well, just look at the Harrison County School Board, which demographers and Amir and Nasami and Monica, they looked at and we reviewed to see there was not an opportunity for another minority representation at this time on the school board. However, the most standout significant factor is the minority population increase. Because you don't have a majority district that can be advanced, doesn't mean that the representation does not need a larger footprint in the advocacy work. That's in employment, that's in the education, that's having a say in the direction in both healthcare and education.
So one last question before we move to our next speaker comes from Vincent Sylvain of New Orleans Agenda. And the question really is, was the pressure on the city council, I think you said it resulted in carving out a third district, a third minority district. So
that is correct. So when we looked at, of course, when we looked at that process, we were looking at minority representation. It was the assumption of a Black district. We were looking at minority representation as it reflects the demographics growth in the city of Gulfport in Harrison County and its obvious growth. So we were not originally a part of the design of those maps with their consultant. On the back end, we were able to do our due diligence and effectively review the population, look at the numbers, and see where there was a legal opportunity to increase a third minority on the city council.
Well, that's a very striking success. I want to ask our speakers to monitor the questions coming in on the chat. And if you are able to respond on the chat, that would be fantastic, because we have two more excellent speakers and I want to make sure we have final room for last minute questions, but there's some very good questions on the chat. So we go next to Pastor Jose Rodriguez, who has been very active in serving the growing Latino population and who joined forces with One Voice on the census and has been working around issues of health disparities to expand access for Latinos during the COVID pandemic. So Pastor Rodriguez, are you, I can't see you, but I want to make sure you join us.
Can you see me?
Yes, there you are. Thank you so much for joining us. Tell us, you made a very important point in our conversations earlier that Latinos have a real affinity for Mississippi, that there is a real sense of comfort with the people of Mississippi, but that a very important event happened in 2019 that had a mobilizing effect on you and other Latinos. Could you tell us about that? And then tell us what you think the biggest issues at stake for Latinos in getting representation, which you have no representation now in Mississippi.
Yes, well, thank you, first of all, Ms. Sandy, for having me here. I just want to say, basically, I mean, it's hard to go back to 2019 and not want to cry for the families that was affected. I'm gonna try to stay strong, but there was a tragedy. It was so sad situation happened in 2019, exactly in the month of August the 7th. it was one of the large immigration rate we ever have here in Mississippi or in the whole country. I would say like that. There was several poultry industries that was targeted by immigration. And there was the first day at school, by the way, I will never forget that. The parents that was able to send the kids to school in the morning time, but when it was time for them to pick them up or bring them back home in the afternoon, the parents, there was no way around because there was in a detention center. Immigration have did one of the most painful activity on a Hispanic immigrants communities in the history. And but they really, it was terrible devastation for the families, a separation also between the kids and the parents and husbands and wives, and they affecting and impact the Hispanic community here in Mississippi on several counties of economic way. Also, it was a terrible devastation. A lot of kids, they have to have a psychologist to assist in them because they don't understand. You know, how can you explain somebody it's when they are 5, 6 years old, your parents, they are in immigration detention center. They don't know what's going on. They don't know anything about it, but you cannot explain to them. So they're affecting the communities really, really, really hard. And it just
that is what really got you engaged in organizing around the census. To what extent do you feel that the need for representation for Hispanics is now better understood, and what do you see happening around local activism with your community?
Yes. Well, yeah, that's when that situation happened. That's when I got engaged and I see the need to organize and mobilize our communities. And I started open my eyes and see we really don't have representation here in Mississippi locally for the Hispanic communities can sign up a bills benefit, not hurting our communities. So yeah, we do need local representation on each county, each city. We don't have, beginning from the school boards and city councilors, we don't have any representation to my knowledge, not in the South Mississippi, not in the Center Mississippi, or either in North Mississippi.
So, Ms. Lambright, could you confirm that there is no political representation, or Mr. Fredericks, just for Latinos in the counties where you are actively working?
Yeah, that is correct.
Absolutely, and I would agree, but I would also add the point to the gentleman in question. Pay close attention to Harrison County because of the diversity and the growth in economics. We saw the largest increase in the Hispanic population in the last couple of years, and it continues to grow.
That this is really such a powerful body of information we need to know more about, and I'm sorry we're so limited in time. Mr. Rodriguez, there's several Spanish language media on the call who may want to do follow-up interviews with you, but we so appreciate your taking time away to be on this call. Let me go now to our last speaker, and then we'll have room for final questions. Thank you also for checking out the questions on the chat. Our last speaker is Daniel Q. Lay, Director of Boat People SOS. And Mr. Lay, can you tell us about the largest Asian American population in Mississippi, Vietnamese, and the extent to which you see civic engagement and working on the issue of fair representation as very urgent?
Well, Ms. Sandy, thank you so much for inviting me, and a great shout out to all the distinguished panel for providing great information. Again, my name is Daniel Lee. I am the branch manager for both People SOS here in the Gulf Coast. We have two offices here in the Gulf Coast, one in Mississippi, one in Alabama. We are the largest Vietnamese social service organization across in the country. We have 6 branches across the United States. There are 2 here in the Gulf Coast. We have 1 in Fort Worth, Virginia, Atlanta, Georgia, Houston, Texas, and the Orange County in California. To get back to your question, Ms. Sandy, according to the 2010 census, there was approximately 5,000 Vietnamese living in the lower 3 counties, which is Harrison, Jackson, and Hancock County, which I believe was grossly underrepresented, because we know there's a lot more than that. However, in 2020, by us working closely with different local entities and state governments, we were able to increase that numbers to about 10,000 in the lower 3 counties, which is, I think, is very close to the actual numbers. But I think there's still a lot of people out there have not been counted as part of the Vietnamese community in Mississippi. Again, the Vietnamese American community is the largest minority population here in the state of Mississippi.
Tell me,
we've been here. The Vietnamese community has been here since 1975, but has not. Again, we don't have any legal representation on any kind of representation within the state, local, or municipal government. And that is some of the things that we were working on to making sure that there is a voice representing this community going forward.
you told me before the conference in a prior call, the issues most at stake for Vietnamese right now include environmental justice. And you talked about the need to have Vietnamese interests at the center of conversations that involved construction projects. Could you talk a little about how you see the stakes most important to the community you serve?
Yes, within the past few years in Biloxi area, where the majority of Vietnamese community residing, the city was basically replacing all the sewer system, and they dig up the road. Instead of doing one block at a time, they decide they outsource this to a local contractor, and they dig up the whole city. With the roads were all digging up, and there's no way to get around. So people were having a hard time getting from one point to another, and there was dust everywhere, and which caused a lot of our older citizens, senior citizens, who have an emphysema or breathing issues, and as well as the physical damage to the car when they were going through the potholes. So we as a community got together and went to the city and basically voiced a complaint to the city about some of these issues, ongoing issue that has been addressed. But unfortunately, the city just turned it, never will respond to our needs or concerns. And that's one of the reasons that we felt that, in order for us to have a voice, to have the interest of community, be at the forefront, we need to have a voice. We have to have someone in the community to step up and be that voice, whether to run for a city council position, what have you. So in order for us to affect positive changes, we have to be at the center, have to be in the circle where the decisions are made. And
Right.
we at BPSOS do have a next gen leadership training where we identify and recruit young leaders, where we provide mentoring and leadership training, and hopefully they can take that rank to be, run for public offices here to represent the voice of the Vietnamese community.
So thank you for very inspired presentations. I want to ask Mr. Fredericks and Ms. Lambright, to what extent do you see the One Voice Coalition and the NAACP efforts becoming more integrated with the new immigrant Hispanic and Asian populations? I know that that's your goal. Tell us just a little about that, and then I have a final question from the chat for each of our speakers.
Okay,
Yeah.
do you want to take that first, Nasambi?
Oh, yeah, I'll just say real quickly, we have a civic engagement roundtable that we run with the NAACP. And so definitely seeking to build relationships and open that up to more groups and more communities. We need more folks involved and we just need to be working together more. And I'll just leave it there.
Well, great. I know you asked me immediately for the contact information.
Yes.
Daniel Lay. Okay. And Mr. Frederick.
Okay, I
sorry,
want to extend that opportunity, Mr. Lee. It's excited to see him here and the gentleman representing the Hispanic representation here. I look forward to talking with you and us sitting down, organized through one voice, possibly us sitting and having a productive engagement. But both of those individuals, both from the Vietnamese population and Hispanic population, being here on the coast and the second largest, I think collectively we need to continue this pathway forward to advancing opportunities, and we should get together and work on that.
Well, I absolutely, Mr. Frederick, thank you so much for the invitation. Just want to let you know that we have been working closely with Mr. Cromwell here at the Biloxi NAACP chapters, and Mr. Gordon Jackson as well. He's one of our supporters and one of our partners as well. So we've been active connecting to different organizations here. Together, we know that no one individual can do the work alone. We need to work together, work as a group. And then we all have the same common denominators to making sure that every vote is counted, everyone is represented under the same law.
But they're not Gulfport.
Well, we do, you're right. We do have, a large contingent of Vietnamese community live in Gulfport as well. So we're going to reach out to every organization that have an interest in working with the Vietnamese community.
Yes.
Let me ask now, because of how short time has become, we will go over 4 minutes because we started 4 minutes late, but this is time for a final question. And it comes from the chat. It comes from Sung Byun, who is the editor of the Korea Journal in Houston, where they also have, of course, in Texas, serious issues with gerrymandered maps and voter access. How much do you see, and this is a very important point you made, Mr. Badat, at the beginning, where you said Mississippi is sort of a bellwether, it's sort of a predictor of things happening across the South. How much do you see this shift of emphasis, this pivot from state and congressional district map drawing to local issues of representation? How connected do you feel with other states in the South fighting for fair redistricting? How do you see this as a kind of, I don't want to say new, we journalists love to imagine that we're on the news curve, so we pronounce everything new, but maybe it's better to say remarkable shift from losing ground at the state redistricting, but gaining ground at the local level. That's really an inspiring story. And do you see that mirrored in other states in the South? I'll start with Mr. Badat, and then just each of you have less than a minute to give your final thoughts on whether this is something to take hope in as we conclude and look at the South.
I thank you for the question, and I apologize for the background noise. I have my landscaper here who is cutting the grass literally right behind me. So I apologize if there's a lot of background noise going on. But I do think that this is part of a shift across the South and across the country that we're seeing towards an emphasis on local and county level redistricting. And I think that it's, I have a lot of hope and a lot of optimism about this shift. And I think we can use Gulfport as an important example for why. In Gulfport, through our advocacy, we were able to get the entire city council to vote unanimously for a map that we supported. And that's really, really important, because we could have had this fight go through the courts in a really, really adversarial process and achieved a similar outcome. But what happened was that through the advocacy and through the work of community, the city council members understood the importance of minority representation on the city council. And they understood why it was important for them to pass a map that the community supported, because that impacted their legitimacy and their credibility within the community. But by having a unanimously passed map, I think that really shows the power of this type of local advocacy. It also, and I think that it shows that this is possible, not only in Gulfport, not only in Mississippi, but across the country. And we're seeing this type of stuff happening across the country in Florida, in Alabama, in Louisiana. And I think it's a signal that there is change happening, and it's a very positive change.
Thank you, Ms. Lambright. You fired up a room full of advocates from across the South in Atlanta recently with your comment that there's no such thing as a lost cause in Mississippi. How connected do you feel with the rest of the South?
Absolutely. I think that, you know, just sea change of stuff happening throughout the South. And I also have to remind folks about our 2019 redistricting case around Senate District 22, where we went to the Supreme Court, even when the governor, lieutenant governor, fought a gerrymandered Senate district here in Mississippi that now an African-American man sits in that Senate seat. And so I just have to repeat our national NAACP motto: when we fight, we win.
Thank you. That's an inspiring note. Mr. Fredericks,
Yes.
how do you see this as a sort of sign to look for in the future across the South?
Well, we say on the Gulf Coast, the Golden Gulf Coast, this is a golden opportunity. And I would echo what Nasambi said. And we are passionate about following that legislative Senate district that happened in 2019, because the same thing can happen here on the coast. And when we fight, we win.
Thank you. Do you have final thoughts, Ms. McInnes? Let's see. Have we lost Monica McInnes because, okay.
Just a final thought, what everybody said is we continue to fight. When we fight, we win. We're still on the battleground. We're still here. We're still in the process. This fight is not over. We have many years to come. I know that this is just the beginning for some. It's not the end. And as Nashami already stated on it in Mississippi, we went all the way down to 2019 with the 2010 redistricting cycle.
Wow. Okay. And Pastor Rodriguez, your final thoughts about the challenges for Latinos, not only in Mississippi, but across the South. Do you see this push for fair representation a growing concern? Mr. Pastor Rodriguez.
I think he's on.
We may have lost him, but he was such a passionate voice on behalf of the challenges facing Latinos. Thank you so much to One Voice for making that introduction. And finally, Mr. Lay, you have the last word. How do you see what's happening for Vietnamese in Gulfport and along the Gulf in Biloxi? How do you see it in terms of the struggles of Vietnamese and Asian Americans in other southern states that have lost out through gerrymandered maps?
Well, you know what I think by having I think we can coalesce and come together and working toward that. You know, the Vietnamese community is very much fabric of the Mississippi as well. And we need to work with every organization that have an interest in putting the community, the Mississippian first. And then, and hopefully in another few years, we want to have, a representative, a legal representation of the Vietnamese community, whether it's in a state, local, or municipal position, where the voice of the Vietnamese community can be heard, where decisions are made for the interest of the Vietnamese community, not for, for other special interest groups. So that is my hope that within the next few years, there is an active voice for the Vietnamese community, represent the Vietnamese community at the state, local, or municipal level.
Okay, you have given us an inspiring hour of your thoughts, and it is so exciting to feel a connection, even if it's via Zoom, to Mississippi. We are so grateful to you for your time and your dedication. Thank you very much. We look forward to sending a recording. We had many media, over 55 media on this call, which I think does represent a very strong interest in knowing what's happening throughout the country, and particularly in the birthplace of the civil rights movement. Thank you so much. Our conference is now concluded.
Thank you for having